Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. What's up, y'all? It's time for episode 12, and today we are welcoming to the show an engineering leader turned employee experience executive and coach. Or perhaps you know them better as your BFF on TikTok, dropping wise words and career gems from inside big tech. That's right, folks. It's Ash Coleman, aka Ash, Your Tech Bestie. Ash, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
I am so stoked to be here, Lauren. Legit, when you pinged me, I was ecstatic because just one, our history, and then also being able to talk shit about all this stuff just felt right at the time. So I appreciate you reaching out.
We're going to talk a lot of shit today. I can definitely, it's in the air. It's shit talking season. But I mean, before we even get into that, how are you?
Thank you for asking. I'm doing very well today. It's a beautiful day out here in Charlotte. I was just outside. Fall is coming, and that means a lot of things for me, including my birthday. Libra gang,
Libra
as we talked about. Yep, Libra season's happening, and I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking.
I'm really happy to hear, we're like enjoying our birthday month, let's be honest, and, all the things that come with it. And we're both like growing, brands and exciting things. And Ash, you've had a really amazing, very impressive career trajectory, and you've moved into some really incredible spaces. And before we even dive into that, because I think there's a lot to go through there, I mean, let's talk about early days, like what initially attracted you to tech? I mean, you can go back as far as you want to, but you don't have to lay on the, therapist sofa. It's cool.
No, that's totally fine. Luckily, I've had a lot of years to perfect this story. And for me, it just gets more and more passionate every time I tell it because it really is a large part of what I do today and all of the twists and turns in between. So I started out in tech unknowingly. When I was a kid, we came from an impoverished family and there was a lot of things we did not have. However, my brother was one of the smartest people I knew, and he was really great at pulling computer parts and pieces together. And me wanting to be his best friend all the time just followed suit. And so working with him and building and coding and doing all that sort of stuff was the funnest thing about my childhood. Aside of we would cook and we would do all this other stuff, but my brother's my best friend. I love him to death. And he really got me started with that tech savvy mentality. And it wasn't until I moved to New York City and I had a couple of other failed careers that I realized, oh, this actually is a career choice. And it wasn't until a friend reached out to me who I used to fix his computer all the time. It was really funny. He called me, said, hey, you know that like geeky stuff you do? My company's looking for someone to do that as a contractor. And since you're not up to anything, you want to do it? And so I said, yes. And it was history from there.
That's incredible. I mean, also, I would say, especially, at that point coming up, not a lot of other women in the space that I'm aware of, at that time. I think now we're like constantly fixated on like, okay, we need to have a diverse team. And that means we need to hire, people who are, non-male, I'll say like either that's non-binary, non-gender conforming, or, we could also look at, women. And I think also, when we speak about that, coming into a space where you don't see yourself, that was the beginning of your career. I mean, people get to that. They say, oh, I'm in leadership. I don't see myself represented. So that's why I want to be a leader. But that sounds like it was the beginning for you.
It was 100% the beginning. And it's funny that you say that because when I got in the industry, the team was all male. All male. There was one woman on the team and she was leading it. And eventually she left the company. So it was me and the boys. And it was wild because not only was I the only woman, I was the only Black woman. And you look around you and you see no one like you and you start asking yourself, is this really where I'm supposed to be? Is this meant for me? Is this a place that I can thrive and grow? And I started reaching out to different organizations and spaces where I started seeing more Black women, not in tech necessarily, but in agile and a few other spaces, and started to connect all of those dots. And then I started mentoring and I started getting mentored. And I started coaching and doing all this other stuff to really just build the community around me so that I knew I was in the right place. It was for no other reason than making sure we had that community to be able to learn, grow, and really flourish in tech. And once that started, it really was the launch pad to the rest of my career, understanding what networking and relationships meant to
Mm.
building a career. Also, really understanding your own identity, because when you get in that space and you have so many questions, the last thing you want to be questioning is who you are.
Yeah. And I think that's also something when, you talk about with your brother taking apart something and putting it back together. You sort of talked about that just now, with the roles that you held and really disassembling it, breaking it down to its core ingredients, and then saying, okay, what are my ingredients and where does that align? And when you're building your community, I mean, natural air sign qualities here with the Libra. I mean, we're always going to try to find our, our people. You also started off working in the QA quality assurance and test engineering space. I mean, what was that kind of move? Was that from that contract role you moved into that full time, or was that a totally different pivot?
Yeah, so there's two things here I'm going to touch on. The first is I love how you said ingredients, because a lot of people know this, but a lot of people don't. I was a chef before I was an engineer.
I mean, I did
And
know that, but I
I
wasn't
mean,
trying to play
right?
that word up.
Totally fine. But to be honest, it's all the same. And when people start asking me about why engineering was the next step, it's a recipe. If you understand syntax, if you understand coding, it's literally how do I make a thing that is consumable by X, right?
Mhm.
Ingredients, put it in the oven, result. And so I love that analogy, because it really is what is happening with tech for me, and what was happening at the time. It was figuring out, how do I speak this language, or how do I make this food so that I can get the outcome. But quality engineering was the space that I started in. And quite honestly, it was the very human aspect. I always say that quality engineers are the mediators between tech and people,
Mm,
because we're the closest to the user and we are also the closest to the engineers, while also being both at the same time. And our job is to weigh both equations equally and give feedback that's super heavy on, are we building the best code, and also are we creating the best product? And the only way that that works is having that interpersonal relationship with both of those groups. And I like to say we're the chatty bunch as well, because we're not completely heads down. We can't be. We don't have that ability.
yeah.
So it felt like the right role for me, because as much of an introvert as I am, I still love going out there and speaking with people and understanding. And also, I'm a user of a lot of these products as well, and I have a lot to
Yeah.
say. If you've ever if you've ever spoken to me, I have a lot to say. So it was really
That's why you're on
nice.
a podcast, Ash. This
While
is
I'm on a
perfect.
podcast, exactly. Let's go. Let's go. So it was a great role for me. And it was a nice way to ease into engineering. It was a nice way to really understand how the process worked and really get involved. And again, started working in the agile community and understanding the entire process of how products are built. And yeah.
I mean, also thinking about the environments you've worked in. So, knowing that you've worked in big tech, yes, and like what those spaces look like. You also worked in, agency spaces and creative agencies. And I think a question that I often get, when there's folks that I'm coaching in their careers, they're asking, where do they start out? I speak, to a lot of students and they're like, where do I get my first job? Would I want to go into a big tech company? Like, I think I really want to go work at insert whatever company you can name right
Mm-hmm.
here. And then I actually usually give the advice of like, I think it's really good to work in, an agency type environment where you're working on multiple different platforms, multiple different brands. The projects are really vast. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also a little bit of a quicker pace. One thing that I learned working in big tech, and you've probably seen the same thing, is you have a lot more runway to ideate on the project. And that really was hard for me to get used to because I'm somebody who's like, sure, scrappy is a word people like to use, but I would say nimble. I would
Mm-hmm.
say, really like to run and fire on all cylinders. And I also like to ship the damn thing. Like, let's
Yep.
get this out the door. And so what advice would you give in terms of the types of environments folks should seek if they're moving into kind of, I'll say beyond entry level, maybe their first like big job though, after completing an internship or training or an entry level role?
That is a great question. And I love how you position your clients with giving them the agency perspective. I think that being able to sample and test and to work in a fast paced environment is very much a part of your growth and experience, especially building a foundation in the industry. And I will say, I will use the wise words of Too Short in saying, life is too short. You got to get in where you fit in. And I think that this speaks largely to, where are you going to grow? Where are you going to hit those next number of goals that really help you to establish yourself in that role. Again, this is an identity base. I love in my area of coaching, it's about full body experience. And so how are you contributing as an individual in that space? And where can you do that the best? Because that's when you're going to get your best work. Some folks aren't meant for FANG. I'm sorry, that's just the reality. But
Yeah.
here's also the reality. There's so much tech happening outside of FANG. And I know everyone wants that title on their resume. Oh, I worked at this company and I'm doing this thing and I'm really important. Here's my title. Also, there's phenomenal tech happening outside of FANG.
Mm.
And we would be remiss to not look at opportunities there because there's so much to learn. So I would
Yeah.
say get in where you fit in.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing too is that, I mean, I definitely felt that like wanting to come in to companies, and have that name on the resume, but also realizing that sometimes when, people were seeing a certain name of a company on my resume, they were already writing their own dialogue of what I
Mm-hmm.
did and who I was based on that. And I found myself having to unteach so much about what I've done over the years because people just make assumptions based on the fact that, oh, you worked at Airbnb, you must have done XYZ. And, also, could you tell me how to make my own listing? I'm like, first of all, no, that's not what I do. And second of all, that is like so far from my work and my actual impact that what are we really discussing here? So I think that also that preconceived notion that comes with like what that company is all based on someone else's perception of like what the actual company is to them. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all like, it's all just subjective. I mean, I think that also like knowing that you've held different roles, do you want to tell us what your favorite job was prior to you doing your own damn thing?
Yes. So that's a good question. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that question. To be honest, I love engineering. I
Mm,
love being a quality engineer. And more specifically, I love being a quality engineering leader.
mm,
And this is why you get so much exposure with other leaders at the company. You get to fraternize with a number of the pieces that build the product and really get your perspective and your team's work out there, advocating, pushing for change, going through the big exercises that really build you is what has been my favorite moment in my career. And I do feel like engineering leadership has defined the way that I went into the world as a DEI leader or
yeah.
as an employee experience leader. Because one, engineering is the largest demographic within most of these companies, let's be honest, probably upwards of 80%. And if you understand how they function, how those leaders think, how the engineers work, then being able to apply that to your strategy or to your architecture, whatever it is that you're building from there forward is such a huge advantage. And I have to say that was my unfair advantage in any people role that I ever had was understanding what engineering was up to from a personal perspective.
Yeah, like you've been there, you've been in
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that there is often a disconnect. It's like if you're working with design teams or creative teams, there's also an assumption about how they work, but people often assume how engineers work. I love that you referred to quality engineering as the chatty bunch. I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
really fun. But also, knowing that there's different personality types that make their way into engineering, different, backgrounds and skill sets. It's not all the same. It's not all everybody. We're just writing HTML5 and CSS. Like what? Like that's not what we're doing over here. Like there's actually a
Exactly.
lot more to it. So even just building that empathy, and I think that's something that really comes through for you. I mean, I think like aside from being charming and cool, you really do come across as this like very authentic and friendly and person who wouldn't judge someone for asking questions about the industry. And I feel like, being Ash, your tech bestie, I'm like, yeah, you are my tech bestie. I want everybody wants an Ash in their life. I mean, did you have anybody like this for you in past work environments who was able to be that point of perspective or non-judgmental point of view? Because it's a grind. I'm not going to lie. It's a fucking grind.
It is a grind. And that's really interesting that you asked that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately as I'm building this new product, if you will, that I'm putting out into the world. Mentorship is one of the number one things that's often grinded into your head about you need to have your mentors, you need to have your folks, you need to have your people. And I want to say that a lot of the work that I've done has been built with peerships rather than mentors. And that's not for any fault of anyone, or I don't think that that's a negative as well. I think that when you surround yourself with like minded people, you're about the build. And sometimes that advances a lot faster than what a mentor might have to contribute to your growth. I do have those folks and I love them dearly. So I have a woman who is in the legal and DEI space who is my number one go-to for all things DEI and what the fuck just happened, right? Like she's my person. And so when I reach out to her, it is about alignment. It is about in some ways peership, but then she's also plays a mentorship role with me as well. And then there's other leaders that I've worked with who have been through this before, and their role for me has been, you might not want to do that, or yeah, you want to do that. So
Mm.
it's a very loose mentorship. It's not a hand holding one. But again, I think that that speaks to the speed in which I'm consistently moving, and also the desire to build peers and communities around me and move with those communities.
Yeah. And I think that also, it's funny. I refer to, people like that. I have what I call friend tours where they're, yes, they're mentors, but they're also a friend. And I can send the text and be like, this thing just happened. My mind is blown wide open. What the actual fuck? And they're like, yes, what the actual fuck? And like we need people like that, and then they
Mm-hmm.
also are the ones who are like, what is the gift? And you're like, I don't see the gift. The gift is not coming right now. Like, please
Right.
stop asking me what the gift is because you've seen this play out before, but I have not. And that's the mentorship. And I
Right.
also think that peership too is like, I really think that folks can be mentors without being managers or being leaders, and they can really offer that. And it's often the exchange, and that really has to do with empathy. You described yourself as an
Mm-hmm.
empath, when we were talking earlier. And I think that there is a really great, kind of element of empathy that comes from extending yourself to a peer and offering support. And the best teams that I always strive to build are the ones that are kind of the yin and the yang of the, looking for where can we balance the skills. I don't even want to say soft skills because they're
Mm-hmm.
not
They're not
soft.
soft at all.
They're super important. And we need
Mm-hmm.
to actually make them the perimeters of everything that we're building. But
Mm-hmm.
it's oftentimes those overlooked, this person is really great at presenting and this person really wants to be better at presenting. Great, let's pair them up. And
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, that kind of peership, all of it, I think is really important. Yeah, just a aside, I totally agree with that, kind of thinking of it. Knowing that you also move from being an eng manager into the D&I space, into being employee experience, into actually being, seen as a key stakeholder when it comes to people teams. No big deal, right?
No big deal.
What was the scariest thing for you about pivoting from being an engineering space that felt probably very familiar, very much like home to you, and then to the people and employee experience space? And yes, you are a people, and yes, you are an employee that has had experiences, but that space we're often asked to be more neutral, maybe than we actually feel. What was that like for you? And feel free to talk about that neutrality as much as you like.
Yeah. So anyone who's worked with me knows that I have no chill. And it
That's why we get
was
along, Ash. Yeah.
exactly, I have no chill. And it's taken years to refine that approach and that process. However, I'm still quick with it, is what people say, like, Ash, so quick with it. And I say that because when you're talking about fears and when you're talking about pieces that really help build and that help me grow, the fear is that people aren't hearing you. I had a moment this week actually where, and this was like full sobbing tears moment of my week, where I'm like, people just don't care. And I said that because you look around you and you see the problems and you see people are struggling, and not only struggling, you see people are hurting. And
Mm.
that's something that I think a lot of folks don't have that conversation about what's going on in the office, is the fact that some of the things that are going on in the office from the very leaders you're paying, that they are causing harm to individuals in the orgs. And when you're in that role, like a DEI role or an employee experience role, you're advocating for the individuals who are in the company, like in the building. And of course, you're building products and stuff, and you're talking about how that impacts folks outside of the company as well. But being in the company and seeing that people, it's not even that they're not listening. I'm positive that it's not that they're not listening. It's really that it just doesn't align with their business goals and or initiatives. And The thing that I've had to bring myself to is saying, you know what, that's okay because that's their business. Literally, these are folks who are building big companies and they have a very specific view on how they want that company to exist in the world. And your perspective might be one of a million, and it might be insignificant from a priority perspective. But it really does hurt when you see other people hurting because of the lack of attention they're paying to the thing that you've been brought into the company to contribute, the voice that you have worked really hard to develop, and the feedback and analysis that you're consistently pumping into those people teams or into that company. And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but
This is the
really
place to do it.
right. That's one of the biggest fears that I have, and that continues to ring true, is that people aren't listening. And if they are listening, then they don't care.
Mm,
And if they do care, it's that it's not a priority. And it just keeps going down and down and down the list. But
yeah.
you do get those moments in your career where you work with folks who do care, listen, and create a priority for the work you're doing. And
Yeah.
those are the moments that you need to figure out how to get to. Because when you're working on the best teams, I've had 2 times in my career where I've worked on teams that legitimately I will speak about until the day I die. And both of those were very empathetic teams. Both of those were really hard work in getting folks on your side and hearing you and focusing on your priorities. And once we got to that place, it was effortless getting work done.
Mm. And I think that also the amount of trust that we're asking for, in people teams, in people spaces, is that one, we're creating a safe space for the employees to be able to talk to us, to be able to ask for advice. And then we're also offering our trust that when we talk to leaders and we present, this is what's actually going on, that they're going to hopefully respond with empathy or with understanding or a desire to create change. And one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I've experienced is that I've had both good and bad, but I can think of examples of times where I've brought forth something that felt like very much a huge problem that needed to be discussed. And it was met with, I think that you shouldn't be speaking so much about what's going on. It seems like there's a lot of, concern that you're putting on feelings and emotions, and we really need to stay the task. And I remember that stay the task will always be like that hideous banner that flies over that conversation, because stay the
Mm-hmm.
task is like, my fucking task is to like let you know that someone is struggling and that
Mm-hmm.
there is hurt that's being inflicted based on someone not using their mind or not caring, like you said, maybe both. But also, we're excusing behaviors. And so I think so much of what this role is meant to articulate in larger companies is that, hey, the behaviors need to change. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I can think of a time where I walked into, the CEO's office at a company I worked at. And I was like, what's going on with your pushback on, us putting pronouns in signatures? Because
Mm-hmm.
this is so simple and it's not going to hurt you. And he went on a thing and it basically immediately became so obvious that it was all about his discomfort, right?
Sure.
And he's like, oh yeah, well, how is it that they, them is even an appropriate pronoun? And he proceeded to wave his hands in front of his face and said, well, I want to go by this. And it was a hand wave. And my name is now this. And so I said, okay, this. And I did the gesture back. And I said, is there any other questions? And, it was that moment that I think there was like a light bulb that went off, but this man did not want to admit that there was like this aha moment until a week later when he saw me getting coffee and was like, so you did that thing where you responded and used my made up name with hand signals. And I realized how easy it was for you to do that. And so I'm going to try. And it was like, motherfucker, are you serious? It took me like just gesticulating back toward you, your own stupid thing that you suddenly got it. Like, what is it? What is it that it takes?
It, that moment is different for everyone.
That's
So
true.
bravo to you for finding that moment for that person. Some folks will never get it. And that's one of the realities that you have to face in this role, is that one, I'm putting a lot of business strategy to human emotions, feelings, identities, etc. And there's a large degree of discomfort that comes along with that. Folks just do not operate in the way of implementing strategy or rules or whatnot if they personally are not committed or feel comfortable with said thing. And so that's why coaching is a large part of this role itself, is
Hmm.
being able to do exactly what you did. What is that thing that's going to get this person to feel connected to pronouns, or to uh, our Black and brown folks at the company being able to have uh, funding for an offsite, whatever it is. What's wild to me is how we work in such data forward industries, and yet the data that is there present for people and individuals in the company to be able to support pronouns, or ERG, employee resource group initiatives, just doesn't hold the same candle. They're like,
Mm.
oh, well, show me the numbers or show me the things. And then you show the numbers and you show the things. And folks are still not bought in, because the reality is exactly what you said. It comes down to their comfort. It comes
Hmm.
down to how they feel about it. It comes down to what they're being taught. It comes down to even politically, of which I had mentioned we're not going there. But at the same time, sometimes you really have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is, oh, so you're just not comfortable with this.
Hmm.
That's okay if you're not comfortable with it, but just say it what it is, instead of leading other people to believe that, oh, these numbers, because what you're doing is you're gaslighting individuals.
That's right.
And no one needs that. If your discomfort is the thing that's telling you the no, then just let me know straight up, because then I won't push. Then I won't try and go find more numbers, waste your time, your money, my time, my money, going to do these things just to present you with a strong case to which you're then going to say no, because the reality is you just don't feel great about calling me she, they. Thank you.
And they already made up their mind. They already made
Exactly.
up their mind before you walked in the door to have that conversation with those metrics, with that beautiful Google slide deck that you made, whatever the fuck. They've already made up their mind. And I
Yeah.
think that to me is the thing that's like, we're arm wrestling someone who's been working out for five times a week for 3 months, and I've been like eating snacks, like that's
Exactly.
like, it's like I'm just here like ready when you are, because I know how to have this fight. But like you've
Mm-hmm.
been training and you think you're ready to like be up against me. You got another thing coming for you, because you want metrics, I got metrics. You want me to draw a picture, I'll draw a picture. I don't care what it takes, like I'll do your stupid arm gestures back toward you if that's what it takes to get you to be bought in. But
Right.
admitting the discomfort, and I don't want to chase people down to have them confess to me what their deepest, darkest fears are. But oftentimes that's what this role
It
is.
really is.
Yeah.
It
And I
really
mean,
is.
gosh, there's probably 100, but what's one idea you think the majority of people get wrong in the DEI space? I mean, for one, the fact that it's like DEI, DNI, diversity and belonging, it's got 100
Exactly. It's
names.
got a million names. Exactly. Um,
Yeah.
sorry, I'm laughing because my favorite part is folks thinking that this is a Black initiative. So
Thank you. Yes.
there was an executive that I worked with, and legitimately their whole thing was, well, can we focus on other diversity? And I'm like, who do you think occupies these other diversities that you're talking about? So if you're talking about the LGBTQ community, what do these people look like? What do they sound like? Where do they come from? Right. So it's so funny to me when people are like, oh, well, this is just Ash's Black initiative for the company and all this other whatnot. And I'm like, no, I actually just have a Black perspective, which is one of the lowest demographics in tech, to be present in the building. And when the rising tide lifts all boats, we're talking about making sure we're focusing towards our Black and brown communities, because literally everyone else will benefit. But if you want to talk about neurodivergence, we can do that too. Also, I'm in that community as well. So who is it that you're actually asking about? If you're asking about what is a white initiative in diversity, equity, inclusion, we can talk about that. But you need to say that explicitly instead of saying, can we talk about other diversity? Because diversity is diverse. And that means that there's many faces to what that is. That's many nationalities, it's many perspectives, it's many orientations. And if you're just uncomfortable at the fact that we're focusing on a demographic that you're not a member of,
Mm.
that's great. We can talk about what the other piece to that is. What initiatives specifically work towards our white brethren and sisters out there in the world? We can do that. But
Yeah.
please don't play me and say that, oh, there has to be other diversity out there that we're focusing on.
Also, like,
Okay.
why does it have to be one diversity that we're focused on? Like, I'm sorry, are we only able to like direct our attention toward one prototype of whatever they've decided that the diversity menu is for the day? Like, can we not just focus on like multitudes of, like you said, diverse initiatives that will bring in groups of individuals? And also these baseline metrics, I'm ranting and I'm going to go there, but the baseline
Please.
metrics that these companies want is they're giving you the bare minimum. They're telling their
Mhm.
talent acquisition and recruiting teams, here's the bare minimum of what you need to do. And the way that I've always led my teams is like, that's a minimum. If you're trying to do minimum work, you're on the wrong fucking team. Let's blow this shit out of the water. Like, why not open the door and say, great, you're telling me that half of the people that we meet with have to be from an underrepresented, gender. Okay, great. That sounds really good to me. But what if it was 80%? I don't
Mhm.
care. Like, I'm not going to like tell you that you did too much. Okay. But these companies are just trying to have these baseline metrics to meet a standard that they've decided that 25% of underrepresented minorities, which means at companies I've worked with, Black, Latinx, Indigenous folks, and they're looking at that and saying 25% is good enough for us. And I'm
Mhm.
like, why does it stop at 25%? Also, if you tell people 25%, then they'll tell you that they reached really, really hard. And oh my gosh, we only got to 19.8. Well, I don't buy it because there's
Mhm.
more than that percentage of folks that are applying and looking at roles. It's right now a buyer's market in tech, especially with the amount of layoffs that there's been, with the amount of shenanigans, I think is the word you used when we were talking before the
Shenanigans.
recording,
Yep.
the amount of shenanigans happening in the industry. So you're telling me that 25% is good enough for you. What?
One thing that is really interesting about these demographics, so these numbers, 25% over in recruiting, that's great. No one's talking about retention. And no one's talking about what actually houses retention for historically excluded individuals. And this is the part where when people just focus on the diversities or how much of each person is in the building, what they're forgetting is how do we keep these folks,
Yes.
right? And that is the thing that folks do not realize DEI is knee deep in the business doing. It's looking at what is middle management up to? What learning cohorts do we have for management? What are we teaching them about bias in their management style? Why does 90% of your Black and Brown demographic have negative marks on their reviews, whereas everybody else has positive ones?
Mm.
Do you feel comfortable giving feedback to Black women? Do you understand the very specific nature of the holidays that we don't necessarily celebrate, but are 100% important to our Judaic community? Do you understand, right? Like these are the things that we're asking in the org
Yeah.
to get people to stick around
Yeah.
because the microaggressions run amok. And it's the million paper cuts issue
Mm.
where it's, okay, I keep getting this feedback. Two bits of feedback I consistently get. One, I'm too robust, duh. And the other one is I'm too direct, also duh. But it's what about my directness is an issue because so and so who is the VP of Eng is an asshole in literally every meeting that we're in and is incredibly direct. However, continues to get promoted and wonderful marks and all this other stuff. So what is it about my directness that's the issue? Is it the discomfort of the topic that I'm talking about?
Mm.
And so we really have to start thinking past these numbers. It's like, yes, we can recruit and we can get as many as how, like, sky's the limit on how many diverse folks we're getting into the building, but it's a revolving door issue. They come in and they
Yes.
leave. They come in and they leave. I want to know how many of those folks are sticking around for 4 and 5 years like everybody else.
Right. And also, what's the reputation?
Yep.
The reputation begins to deteriorate when you are hiring in folks who are from historically excluded backgrounds. They're coming in and they're like, nope. And they're dipping out in 9 months. And then what is reputation, like in the industry and who's hearing that? And then you want to
Exactly.
approach someone else and they're like, absolutely not. 3 of my friends have come through the doors there and left worse for the wear. What are you trying to tell me?
Worn out, burnt out, jaded, just can't. Do you know how many Black women leave tech? Look, we actually have these numbers though at each org. We have the numbers of how many people are coming in the building and they're leaving. And the number one story that's out there is they're getting burnt out or they're hitting. I think it was CNN that just released an article talking about the glass cliff, right? You can only get so senior as a Black woman, and the next thing you know, you're pushed off the cliff because
Yeah.
legitimately your job becomes so impossible to do. You're put in situations that are shitty. You can't grow. You can't advance. No one's supporting your initiatives. No one's hearing you, etc. It's a problem.
God forbid you
And
get pregnant. Then you're really fucked. Yeah.
I was so grateful to work at a company and have a boss who, one, is a woman, but also is a phenomenal leader when it comes to managing and leading women in leadership. Because when I
Mm.
did get pregnant twice, she was 100% there for not only myself, but every other pregnant person in the building, which made my job phenomenal because I could then create strategy for everyone else to be able to consume those same things. And so her being the front runner and saying, here's our mat leave, here's our pat leave, here's our parental leave for everyone, made it super easy to build off of that strategy.
Yeah.
And we need more leaders like that who, one, they're very upfront with their discomfort. Going back to what we were talking about in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
If the answer is no because you're uncomfortable about it, what do you need? Do you need more education? Do you need more coaching? Do you need more time? What are the things that are necessary for you to get comfortable? Because for somebody to stay uncomfortable about something and not grow from that discomfort is wild to me that that's appropriate at an executive level. Because
I mean,
literally
yeah.
that is the basis of growth. And then to use that same discomfort to impede any of your inclusive values within your company, wild shit.
Yes.
Some Here's another part that we don't talk about enough, and I know we were talking about this before we started recording, but the number of times that you hear something that has become a decision within leadership or within the company that as an individual your whole heart just crushes,
Yeah.
or you say, this is so fucking dumb, I can't even stand it, excuse my language, so
Bring the
stupid,
language. Let's go.
right? It's so stupid, like, are you kidding me? But then you're supposed to, mm-hmm,
Yeah.
right, I
Yeah.
understand that, disagree and commit, they call it, right? And
Mm.
I'm kind of coming for that a little bit because that's the thing that continues to keep people in the oppressive states that they're in.
Yeah.
I'm
And
sorry
it's
if
complicit. If you disagree with something and, talk about directness, Ash, talk about like that personality trait that I value and I have in myself too. I'm gonna call it like I see it. And the reason is because I know that if I don't, someone else is gonna have to do that work that is going to make it harder for them to do their job. So I'm
mm-hmm,
fine with discomfort and I'm happy to sit in that bathtub. So let's go for it. I'll just sit here all day and I'll tell you how
all day.
uncomfortable it is. And I'll speak for the person who doesn't have the confidence or the desire to bring it up because frankly, they're exhausted too. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, I think that that's something that I've encountered. It sounds like it's been similar for you.
That is the motivation behind all the work that I do, to be completely honest and fair. I have not had the privilege to not be uncomfortable in literally every working situation that I've been in. And I'm
Mm.
being honest with that. As a Black queer woman, sitting in a room by myself, usually as the only one, is difficult and uncomfortable because everything that I say gets scrutinized. Every idea every idea that I have is an idea that folks go through their many biases to break down and wonder, is this a part of Ash's initiative? Or is this a part of something we can trust?
Mm.
Affinity plays a large part of that, but I do what I do because I'm in the position that I'm in to be able to advocate for those folks. And I know the folks that I've worked with know this in heart and in spirit. I will be there for you. I hear you and I see you and I'm doing the work because I'm in that space and that's my calling at this point.
Yeah,
And this is not a martyrdom. This is a genuine reality that if I'm not doing it, who is that person who's
that's
doing
right.
it?
That's right. And also, like, I will ride for those folks forever. Like for my team, like I dare someone to try to come for them because I will just jump right in front of it. Not that other people can't do it. It's that they shouldn't have to do it. I want to protect the teams that I'm leading or the folks that I'm, consulting with. I want to protect them so that they can keep their mind on the work and the excellence that they need to do. This is stuff that they should not be having to deal with in the workplace. You said 1,000 paper cuts. We could talk about microaggressions. We can talk about any number of things that make someone feel less than and take their mind off the work. If someone's coming into a meeting and they know that 9 times out of 10, they're going to be mispronounced or misidentified and they're not going to be addressed appropriately, they're going to be be bracing and, like kind of waiting for that moment where it happens, they're not even going to be able to focus in the meeting and
No.
think about what's happening. They're not going to be able to present their work effectively because they're going to be worried about X, Y, and Z that's happening. And I've seen it go on before. And then those are the people who then in a performance review are being questioned about their, ability to continue to grow. They're being affected with layoffs or being fired, even worse, because they're being questioned if they're somebody who's, critical talent because, well, they
Mm-hmm.
seemed really uncomfortable in presenting. Well, you've created an uncomfortable environment for them to present in. So whose fault is it really from a performance standpoint?
But no one's asking those questions, right? No one's asking those questions and no one is genuinely looking for answers. So when you approach them with those questions and those answers, you're met with this isn't a priority, or this is uncomfortable, or we're not ready to make that move. And it's like basically what you're telling them is you're not ready to make the safest environment possible for this individual. Right. And
Yeah.
here, I mean, this is 100% side note. I will not say safe spaces because I don't think that those exist. And I think that it's a fault in our stars saying that there are safe spaces in tech. There aren't.
And
Or
safe
any
is a
corporate
subjective
environment.
word. What feels safe for me might feel different for you, Ash. It might feel really
Exactly.
uncomfortable and vice versa. So who am I to
Mm-hmm.
say that I've created a safe space? That feels really self-serving.
Yeah. And so it's creating the safest by doing hearing ears to the scanner is what my term is. I keep my ears to the scanner and I make sure that what I'm hearing that people need, that those topics consistently come up in strategy meetings. Oh, well, that's awesome. I heard this. I want to make sure this. I'm getting a note that this is what's going on. We need to make sure that we're recognizing this in our next review cycle. Right. And not to keep harping on this, but I cannot handle when people genuinely don't care about what's coming back as data from their employeeship about how they're existing in their roles as they're existing in their identities at the company. Because that 100%, like you said, plays into their performance, how they're able to show up and do the work that they're supposed to do. Here's another, I'm about to jump into a canon. Return to office. Good Lord. I can't even with this because now this is not to say that returning to the office is a bad thing. I think that every company has their own identity with what they want to do in person, etc. And I think that we need to do a better job listening. There are more people entering the tech field than there are almost older folks who have been consistently in the game. We need to start understanding what our new generations need and not continuously be ignorant to the responses we're getting about, is this the best environment for the work that they're doing?
Mm.
The one thing that I will say that is a large part of my practice when it comes to return to the office is what specific scenarios is the business looking to create or foster when we are making space in office for people. In other words, what projects, what meetings, what things are the most important things for being in person and why? Because there's this blanket statement about, oh, well, it's just a good environment for people to be together because the best work gets done when we're all together. Okay, so the pandemic already proved that that was incorrect. So then stop gaslighting people into thinking that what we experienced in the pandemic was wrong and wasn't real. And please start speaking more about the desires of the company for there to be in-person engagement for these specific reasons because the business has decided. Not that it's the best for. Because I'm sorry, as a Black woman, I can't. There are people in the office that I see and I'm like, there is no way in hell I would voluntarily come and sit with you, given how toxic your behavior is and the fact that leadership knows your behavior is toxic, but they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah. And also, like, I mean, that's kind of on the principle of vibes, right? It's like, okay, I will tell you firsthand, you can create vibes in a Zoom meeting. My team had epic vibes when I was at Airbnb because what we would do is the first half of the meeting was highs and lows. And that was the vibe check. It was like sometimes the high was like, I had this amazing, breakthrough with a business partner that I've been trying to work with for this long, and it happened this week. And sometimes the high was like a very personal event of like, my kid just took his first steps, or like, and the lows just as much so, and so when you think about short vibes, but like empathy and really building vulnerability. And I believe in that as a leader. I believe in showing that to my team so that they're open to showing that back. I think that, also just creating that space for them to be really kind of freed in that Zoom environment. And what I saw during the pandemic when we had no choice but to go fully remote is that my folks who were more introverted, less likely to speak up in meetings, started to blossom. And there was really this opportunity given to folks who were maybe needed an extra beat, and that could be because of neurodivergence. That could be because of, just general discomfort. That could be from just feeling like they were going to get bowled over in the office for any reason. All of a sudden, the hand raise tool on Zoom was getting used all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Someone would interrupt and someone else would say, hold on, I don't think Ash was done with their thought. And so I think, that I saw so much growth that came from that time.
I wish that we could have more honesty around that conversation from people who, with a genuine interest to understand. I think that you have a number of leaders who have created a space for themselves to be able to say and do the things that they want to say and do. And they are markers in the industry. They are people that folks look up to. And so they're like, absolutely, this company's booming. They return to office and that's great and whatever. And this leader out there, whether they agree or not, has agreed from a leadership perspective to commit to this initiative. And so they're out there, spreading this. That's amazing. That's great. Also, can we get a real conversation? But I also realize that folks aren't really down for the realness. Like, real conversations in a corporate environment are not real.
I mean, talk to me about like, you have had interview experiences where you sat down with folks and were asking how it is at the company. Did they tell you the truth?
No, they didn't. And I'm just like, this is wild to me that in one of your most vulnerable moments that you've prepared for, giving everything that you've got about your experience and how you're going to contribute, folks are lying to your face. And like, interview or not, this is just the larger issue of realness within the corporate sector. Is professionalism is one of the most toxic words in corporate America because, one, it's drastically biased, it's horribly racist, and it's got all of these issues associated with it because, similar to a lot of things, when we look and we see certain things or certain companies on your resume, we make assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. Professionalism is exactly that. It's saying that you are going to work, perform, act, speak, be a certain way in order to be taken seriously. And to me, that's really hard because what that's not open to is the edgier conversations or even the people who lie outside of what would be considered professional. Maybe because their English is a second language, or maybe because they have a heavy accent, a heavy non-American accent. Let's be specific, right? Professionalism is toxic.
Yeah.
And it 100% boxes in individuals who are able to thrive versus those who aren't.
Let me ask like a more personal question on,
Sure.
the interview front. One thing that I really have appreciated is, yes, it's football season. I try very hard to turn a blind eye to the NFL, and yet I still turn one other eye toward it. And I'm like, ooh, football. And Deion Sanders, as a head coach, is receiving a lot of criticism, but also a lot of praise from, I would guess which audiences are which, but his refusal to code switch. And that is the word and the term that's been used, and really, wanting to just keep it very authentic in all conversations, whether it's a press interview, it's a meeting with the team, or it's him on social media. And, that is a word that is also brought into the tech environments with interviews. Do you find yourself able to, are you able to refuse that kind of ask to code switch when you're in those, because you said professional environments, but also that's asking, in my experiences, for somebody who comes from a non-white background to act white. That is oftentimes the conversation. So how do you approach that? And also maybe we could talk about some advice for folks who feel that pressure when they go into those environments.
This is a very complex conversation. So
I realize I'm asking a lot in that question, Ash.
No, you're totally fine. I remember having a conversation, this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I was really riding hard on this idea of bring your whole self to work, right? My idea of a work environment that can house my entire self was the one that I wanted to work in. And I remember having a conversation with a number of other Black individuals at the company. They're like, I don't want to bring my whole self to work. And I was like, that's fair. That's 100% fair, because we know how much criticism we get for the desire or the inability to code switch, right? We show up to work, we put that face on, we put that outfit on, and we're one person. We go home and we're a completely different person. And one, I want to give space for that, where my job has consistently been making it a space where you can bring your whole self to work if you wanted to. Is that actually possible? No.
Mm.
And the reason being is exactly what you're saying. We are highly scrutinized for being who we are, which is also really interesting because, as we know, the Black community is deeply pulled for all of our culture. And it's made popular. It's become the mainstream. People want to look like us. They want to be like us. They want to talk like us. And yet, when we are in workspaces and we're authentically that person, no one wants to acknowledge that they see us as equals, right? Or that they don't see us as equals, excuse me. It is so hard when you see a Deion Sanders who's out there. This is the same Deion Sanders who was phenomenal in his career as a football player.
Yes.
Speaking and acting the exact same way when he was making all that money for the teams that he was working for. Now that he's on his own account and his own accord, and he's acting and being the exact same way, now we want to scrutinize him. We really have to have a firm look at ourselves when we are not capable of saying, when I go to clubs, when I go to the bar, when I'm hanging outside of work, and I'm authentically me, and folks gravitate towards that, and they love me, and they love my style, and everything is hunky-dory. But then that same realness is brought into the office. Ash, you're being a little bit too aggressive here. Right? We really need to have a look as a whole society about why we feel the most comfortable when we're consuming us as entertainment versus when we're peering with us as leaders and individuals. And that's exactly what's going on with that situation.
Yeah.
As a leader, no one wants to see him perform and act this way because it's unprofessional. However, when you're consuming him as a product, yes, I want that. So basically, what we are saying and what we know is that Blackness is a product that people want to consume and use to their own delight. But when it's something that they are interacting with that has alignment with their money or their career or their opportunities, it's not something they're really comfortable with.
And I really appreciate you answering that, just really vulnerably, kind of relating to some of your own experiences too. And I realize that, there is a tax that comes with educating people, and you've somehow chosen to also make this your career, which is like, are you just trying to get double taxed? Like, what's happening, Ash? Yeah. Yeah. But you said you can't stand to kind of watch and see it go by, and you know that this is your calling, which I also think is really amazing. How would you recommend, to folks who are looking at companies to actually evaluate, like, is it chaotic? Is it, is this a space that is even going to remotely have any inclination towards safety for me? Is it going to be a complete shit show? Like, what is the evaluation tool? Are there things that you tell people they should do to assess what is it going to be for me? Because as you said, not every space is for everyone. And when it comes to a company, maybe it's not your company, and that's okay. But what can we do to evaluate?
The first thing, again, I think we need to check in with ourselves and understand what it is that we are and are not willing to give.
Yes.
So I, as an individual who works in leadership, know that there is a certain level of professionalism that is asked for. Now, do I always adhere to that? No. However, I know that that is going to be scrutinized when I don't decide to be or play that part. So for those folks out there, make sure that you understand what you are and are not willing to give, because I promise you over time, it will break you if you are giving more than you have committed to. The second piece to that is, earlier we were talking about the communities and how folks kind of know. Our communities are small in tech, but also because we're small, we have strong communities that talk and understand what's going on. You talked about that reputation. They're going to go to the Black folks they know at the company. They're going to go to the Latino folks they know at the company. They're going to go to the Native folks that are at the company, and they're going to ask them, what's good? And that network will always and forever be the first point of reference.
Mm.
So again, this is about doing your research. Now, I had an experience recently where despite all of the research that I had done, getting into the company was still the biggest shit show. And you have to ask yourself, what are your limits at that point? So you do all the research that you can, you work really hard to get into the companies that you want. And then once you get in there, it might not be what you had anticipated. So you have to know what you're willing to give. Is this 6 months? Is it a year? What is going to be the timeline that you give yourself where you are essentially performing, or where you are trying your best to make a good situation out of an unfortunate choice?
Mm.
And for me, I have no chill. We've already established that. I was gone in 4 months.
Yeah.
But that's not everyone's privilege. And I acknowledge that. I did have the privilege to be able to jump ship, but not everyone does. So create firm and positive communities around you that will support you in times of need and will support you in times of want and all that other stuff. But really, it's the times that we're the most down that we need those communities to lean on. Do your research.
Yeah, definitely.
And then make the best decision that you can.
Who supports you when you're making big moves, big decisions? Because you've made some big ones, and I know you're making more. So what's your support system look like?
My husband.
Yeah.
My husband. He is a phenomenal person. And quite honestly, I could not, we've got 2 kids, and we have a really good program working for us as far as who takes the biggest risks at what time in their career. And I'm lucky enough to be able to make some really risky moves because we have created a home that provides us to do that. So financially, emotionally, mentally, we've created that landing for us. But then also, we both know that we're not taking risks at the same time.
Yeah.
And so my support goes to him and all of those other folks around. They know who they are for upholding me and lifting me during these times. And I promise you, you won't regret it.
I think that, I like that. There's some foreshadowing there. I'm here for it. And I think it's also, it is hard to make that pivot, to make that adjustment. But also so much softer when there's a place to land, when there is somebody who's like, I've got you, I'm riding for you. And I think that's something for me. I mean, I remember it was like our second date with my husband, when we first started dating, and he was like, yeah, it's great to say like 50-50, but I want somebody who like is going to be there. It's really easy when it's happy, but when things are shitty, and when someone loses a job, or when a parent gets sick, or when all of these events that we can't foresee in life happen, it's not always going to be 50-50. Sometimes it's going to be 70-30. Sometimes it's going to be 90-10. I'm pretty sure the last month of my pregnancy, I was like, I've got 10% availability for anything else in my life. He's like, cool. I got 90. I got 92%. What do you need?
Exactly.
And like, I think that is like when we think about career, but there's also so much that goes outside of that, thinking about partnership and who we choose to align ourselves with, and tightening up that circle, tightening up those spaces, because that's also a good thing. And just knowing that like, if you have 1 or 2 people you can count on, it's not about quantity, right? It's about quality. It's about the quality. And I think that also helps to instill that confidence that you're speaking from, just being able to know that like, I can take this risk, I can make this move, and it might be, a minute, but it's going to be a money move, right? Like we're going to be out here making things happen.
It is. I always think of Snoop Dogg in this moment where it's like, I'd like to thank me, because that's the other part of the support, right? Is I'm sorry, I've worked really hard to get to this place where identifying the moments to move have been the win for me. And so, yeah, I'd like to thank me.
I mean, I like to thank you too. I think that's really good.
Thank you.
I mean, you've mentioned Too Short, you've mentioned Snoop Dogg, we've got some musical influence happening. Are there any books or, things that have influenced you that you're excited about that you want to share with folks, kind of point them to? And no pressure.
Yeah. So I just finished reading Proximity Principle by Ken Coleman.
I haven't read that
That's a
yet, but
fun
it's on my
one.
list.
It's a fun one. It talks about like who you surround yourself with, and I've recently taken on a couple board seats and have been working with some folks that are potential clients and whatnot for what I'm doing, and feel really great about aligning myself with those individuals. And that's the one top of mind because I literally just finished it yesterday.
That's amazing. There's a Jay Shetty episode of his podcast where he talks
Yeah.
about the 8 people that you need in your life. And I think it's a really interesting episode. And it's something that like he really goes into, like, not everyone is going to be like the cheerleader. There's also the people who check you. There's also the people who, who are able to just be like a steady constant. And I think that really thinking about that in terms of our careers, it's also important. I don't want somebody who's going to yes me to pieces, because sometimes I do need that reality check. I need someone to be like, are you sure about that decision? And I'm like, not anymore. I'm not, but we need that. And I think that is good. I'll definitely, now it's going to go to the top of my Audible list.
I love it.
I can't believe we're coming up on time. I feel like we could probably just do like a part 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Listen,
more chapters to come.
Give me a couple months and I'll have more to say on some of these very luring comments about what I'm up to.
I like that. I mean, where can people go to learn more about you in the interim?
Oh, heaven. So the place I'm going to direct people right now is jump on Instagram, Your Tech Bestie. Tech Bestie is the handle. And I'm there just giving bits and pieces, but also I've got a podcast coming up soon. And so it isn't. And I'm super excited about that. You're going to get a ton of me talking and just spreading the shenanigans as usual, with an occasional guest every now and again. So
I love it. And what is one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today, Ash?
Heavens. You can do it. I mean, I know that sounds so basic, but there are so many people who come to podcasts like this to get the bits and pieces to assist them in doing the thing that they want to do next. And if my life has been any evidence to the fact that I can get shit done, if I can get shit done, you can get shit done, right? There's room at the table for everybody. And I see you, I hear you. I want you to know that you can do this. So that would be the thing that I'd say.
I mean, not one basic thing about that or about you. Ash, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question: how the fuck did you land that cool job? We will talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.